All right, we are back here. We are halfway through the NFL regular season. We got another 9 weeks of potential craziness in front of us here. Joining us today, Rick Aldown, great friend of the podcast, the pro football guru himself, Russell Baxter is here. Russell, how are you?
Oh, I'm doing good. Getting ready for another week. Very interesting week in the sense that some of the premier teams are off this week. The Eagles, the Dolphins, the Chiefs. So for people who have enjoyed Tyreek Hill and A.J. Brown, either in reality football or fantasy football, I guess you'd be making other plans this week.
Yeah, that's for sure here. And obviously...
Oh, by the way, Patrick Mahomes, I throw him in there too.
Yeah, and Jalen Hurts.
And Jalen Hurts.
Yeah. A lot of talent on the sideline this week here, but I got to say, of the first 9 weeks here, I don't think anybody could have really, I know the joke has always been the NFL is, scripted, quote-unquote. No one could have written this script heading into the season.
No, and yes, I know, and there's a lot of sarcasm involved with the script talk, and some people very, very suspicious of the way things unfold. But it really just kind of speaks about the parity in the league, and I think people need to understand that what we saw from the Patriots for 20 years, and what in some ways we're seeing with the Chiefs right now, are the oddities, they're the exceptions that a team is able to do. They could maybe even throw Philadelphia in there for a little bit, even though they had a little bit of a burp. But remember, this team is, they were Super Bowl champion in 2017. They've been a pretty steady participant in the playoffs, even though they've changed head coaches and so on. But still, they had a miserable season a couple of years ago. So it's hard to do what New England did. It's hard to do what Kansas City is currently doing. And, we saw them 2 weeks ago get thumped in Denver.
Yeah, that's for sure here. And obviously, let's start in New York. That's where I'm based here. Start with the Giants here, because obviously last year they had the big surprise year. They make the playoffs. They win around before they lose to Philadelphia. I think we all kind of knew that they were not as good as their record indicated. But are you surprised the Giants have regressed this much to the point where they're now back, it seems like, in the god-awful football category they were for most of the last 6-7 years?
Well, listen, when you take 9 games to reach the 100-point mark, that's pretty disturbing, especially in this day and age. I had written a piece a couple of weeks ago of them where New England was going to remind us of the 1992 Seahawks, Mike. I don't know if you remember them, but they were 2-14. They scored 140 points in 16 games. It's the record for 16 games. Now, of course, we could see any one team, maybe New York, maybe New England, set a record for 17 points as far as futility and so on. I always talk about that season because amazingly during a 2-14 season, how was this for a script? Cortez Kennedy was the defensive player of the year.
That's pretty wild here. I mean, when you think about the Giants too, it's something you look at them and it's like this team was a playoff team, and I feel like maybe the expectations kind of flipped on them because I feel like if they had this year last year and when they were struggling so badly, and then this year they're playing well and they're in the playoff, I feel like it's a much better read for Brian Dable than the reverse.
Well, it looked like they had turned things around. It was the way they done it, and the fact that they had won a playoff game, I think, certainly raised expectations. Listen, the NFC East didn't have a losing team last year. The Eagles, Cowboys, and Giants all won at least one playoff game. So it just spoke for and Washington was 8-1 and had beaten Philadelphia and Dallas during the season. I knew the Giants' biggest bugaboo going into the year was something they struggled with last year, and that was winning within the division. If you included the playoff loss to Philadelphia, Mike, they were 1-5-1 versus the NFC East. The one win was against Washington. Who was one of their wins this year? Washington. They also got thumped by Dallas 40-0. Haven't even played Philadelphia yet. So that was going to be a problem entering the year. And right now it's kind of reared its ugly head in a lot worse way than you thought. The offensive line hasn't done much at all. Saquon Barkley has had flashes. Daniel Jones has been under siege. For a while there was a battle between him and Sam Howell, who was going to be the most sacked quarterback in the league, and now Daniel Jones is out for the rest of the year with the knee injury. So just a miserable season, and I know some people want to blame the Giants for giving him so much money. He didn't all of a sudden get bad blocking up front because he's making a lot of money.
Yeah, that's true here. And obviously, let's put you in Brian Daboll's shoes here. Your season's pretty much over at 2-7. You're down your starting quarterback for the rest of the season here. Like, what are you hoping for the rest of the year? Because obviously, like, there's the school of thought that, hey, like, let's just get all the young guys on tape and we'll just see if we lose a bunch of games, give this to draft another quarterback. Do we try and go all out here? What do you feel like you want to see if you're Dable?
Well, if you're building a program, with the general manager and the head coach who work together, that's exactly what you do. You do try it out. You don't try to lose. I have people almost on a daily basis giving me they don't say the word tank, but they're upset when their team wins. Can you imagine that? You're upset when your team wins. And then when they don't know how to win in a year or two, you wonder why. Players aren't interested in what next year is about. They're getting paid to do something, and even the veteran players are being looked at. You know that. Are they giving the best effort? Are we going to keep this guy and so on? It's professional football. It's not Monopoly. Okay. So you've got to be professional and you have to do your best. And then you never know. I mean, listen, Denver's off to a 1-5 start. And now, they come out of the off week. I know they get Buffalo this week on Monday night, but Buffalo isn't exactly knocking anybody's doors down. They just held the Chiefs 2 weeks ago without a touchdown. The idea that you, quote unquote, tank, it's almost comical to me. But I think you're spot on. I think you've got to get out there, see what you have, and then start anew. And as we know in this league, turnarounds come a lot quicker than they did in years past. Okay, last year, there were 4 teams in the playoffs that the previous year had finished in last place in the division. That's half of the last place teams.
Yeah, it's definitely a path to a turnaround if you're looking for it real quick here. I also want to go to the other side of New York here, which is the very confusing, confounding Jets season here, because obviously they lose Aaron Rodgers 4 plays into their season. They have some incredible wins. They beat the Eagles. They beat the Bills. Their defense is playing out of its mind. They have some really bad losses. The offense looking up. Like, obviously, like, we know Troy Aikman was tearing the Jets apart on Monday night during the game here. Like, what was your take on what you've seen out of the Jets over 8 games?
Well, this was such a golden opportunity on Monday night. And I say that because everybody else in the division had lost. Okay? Miami lost to Kansas City. Buffalo lost to Cincinnati. And New England, surprisingly, lost to Washington at home. So here are the Jets. They're riding a 3-game losing streak. They can get, to 5-3. They're, hovering around the Bills. They would have as many losses as the Dolphins. And 8 sacks later and a couple of fumbles and no touchdown. And listen, I know there's a rivalry between the Jets and the Giants, but did both of them have to score exactly 6 points the same week?
Yeah, I wouldn't think so.
No. Well, think about this. Think about this. If you're a New York fan, you just watched the Jets and Giants lose to 2 teams that were sub 500 coming into the game and lost to them by a combined score of 57-12.
Yeah, that's not good.
No, that's not good.
Yeah, and right now the big color of the Jets seems to be their offense. Their defense, they talk about themselves being like close to the 85 Bears. They're not there, but they're pretty damn good. The quarterback situation of the Jets has been a disaster. They scored 8 touchdowns in 8 games. The numbers speak for themselves here. And for some reason, this team sticks with Zach Wilson here. So, 2-part question. Number one, you've watched a lot. I'm sure you've seen a lot of Zach Wilson tape here. What do you think of his play? Because I know that the coach has been kind of telling the fan base, hey, he's really close. We're going to click. It's going to be exciting. What are you seeing from Zach Wilson?
Panicky at times. Sloppy with the football. You can't afford to do that. I know this is a league now where we have a lot more running quarterbacks and the turnovers with these running quarterbacks are a little higher than usual. Even Lamar Jackson's having a great year. Has put the ball on the ground a lot of times. Not so much interceptions, but fumbles. But you don't get the back end production with Zach Wilson. Now, I will say there have been times during the season and during this recent stretch where he has had some nice fourth quarter heroics. So it makes you feel like, there's something there. And, it could be a case, a lot of times, Mike, we see younger quarterbacks or even some older quarterbacks, and I hope this makes sense. They're better passers than they are quarterbacks. In other words, they can throw the ball downfield. If they get into a rhythm, they're good. But they don't control the tempo of the game, and avoiding mistakes and not making just bad throws that prove costly. And when they get sacked, don't put the football on the ground. Okay, so that's big. There are certain quarterbacks in this league, when they get hit, the ball is out. There are other quarterbacks in this league that take their share of punishment, but you don't necessarily see them. It's that feel for the game. I don't know if Zach Wilson at this stage of his career has that feel for the game. I think Aaron Rodgers has been good for him, or was good for him at least over the summer and so on, and the time he spent with him. But I mean, there's a lot of work to do. And again, another team with bad offensive line. Listen, having a good offensive line in this league it might be tougher than finding a franchise quarterback.
Yeah, for sure. I forget what you're saying about the mental thing with Zach Wilson. I feel like he's a guy where, like, if you played like the Turkey Bowl in a few weeks and he was your quarterback, you're playing like two-hand touch, he'd be great. But like in terms of trying to read NFL defense, make the mental adjustments, like that stuff he struggles with.
Yeah, I just think it's that. And listen, he hasn't played that much football. If you think about it, he really hasn't been on the field that long on a bigger scale. But the feel for the game, the sense for the game, the sense for the moment, it's not really there. And 8 sacks the other day. Listen, I know their offensive line is bad, but 8 sacks. I mean, I want right off the top of my head, I think there were 2 or 3 players on the Chargers that had multiple sacks. So, you've got to find a way, and he has to get help with the running game and so on as well. But they shot them, and I believe they held the Chargers under 200 yards of total offense, and somehow lost the game by 21 points.
Yeah, that's all true here, and obviously Coach Saleh has been very defensive of Zach Wilson at this point. He said, it's lazy to blame the quarterback for the issues when there's a lot of things going wrong with this offense. He is right about that, where we talk about bad line play calling is questionable, drops, penalties. You can go all down the list, but I feel like the easiest way to try and change something for an offense that's historically bad on third downs and in the red zone is change the quarterback here. And do you think if they made a quarterback switch, the offense would improve significantly?
Well, I don't know about that. I don't know what they really have in mind. Regardless of who the quarterback's going to be, and you talked about the red zone. Well, to me, red zone has also a lot to do with offensive line if you're trying to pound the ball in and so on. So they're really kind of devoid of, another game breaker opposite Garrett Wilson, who had a fumble, I believe, the other night as well. So I don't know if changing the quarterback involved for what's really ailing them. I think they have gambled a bit on thinking their defense was going to be good enough to keep them afloat. And maybe it is. I mean, let's see what happens this week. They get the Raiders this week. The Raiders aren't exactly, I know what they just did to the Giants, and Antonio Pierce had them all fired up this week, but let's see what happens with that. I mean, there's talk, could Aaron Rodgers actually come back? Could he fare any better behind this offensive line? So it's funny. I know the joke that's been out there, and somebody mentioned about the 85 Bears and so on. I don't know about you, but if I was throwing out 85 Bears, I'd look at the Browns right now.
Yeah, they certainly have been pretty good, the Browns here. And let's go real picture here for a couple of things here. So we have a lot of contenders here for best team in the league. If you had to make a pick right now, say who is the top team in the NFL, who do you think it is?
Well, I still think it's Philadelphia. They've been my number one team in the power rankings. They've got Baltimore really kind of nipping on their heels. Baltimore's put up 500 plus yards of total offense 2 of their last 3 games. They're riding a 4-game winning streak. They've given up the fewest points per game in the league. They're getting a pass rush from just about everybody. And, they picked up a guy who, to me, has always been a very unsung player around this league, even though he has some Super Bowl titles. And it's Kyle Van Noy, who has 5 of the team's 35 sacks. And, it's funny because I think people weren't prepared for the Ravens this year in this sense. Under their former offensive coordinator, he built an offense directly around Lamar Jackson, as you know. Todd Monken comes in here, and Lamar Jackson is running Todd Monken's offense. And, after getting used to what the Ravens did for a couple of years, you have a guy who has worked at his craft in Lamar Jackson. Their offensive line is held it together. Again, he's been a little sloppy with the football. I think people would be surprised to know. Did you know Lamar Jackson's fumbled 10 times?
I do have my fantasy football teams. I am aware of that.
Oh, okay. And he's lost 6 of them. And he has as many turnovers as he has touchdown passes, 9. Okay, but they've been so good in other aspects, and it's hard to be great in every aspect. So I give the Eagles the nod because the one thing they're doing this year is they're not necessarily dominating teams, and Jalen Hurts has also had a little turnover bug here as well. But because of their experience, because I think they have the best offensive line in the league, and once again, they're deep on the defensive line, I give them the slight nod as of right now. But Baltimore is coming hard. And this week's game with the Browns, to me, is very intriguing. I want to say Cleveland's only given up 15 offensive touchdowns in 8 games, but 4 came in the loss to the Ravens a couple of weeks ago in Cleveland.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting to watch here as well. I think there's also a couple of teams here that we had high expectations for. They have not been playing well of late, or just in general this season here. 49ers obviously lose 3 in a row after they're 5-0. So they look like they're the best team in the league. The Bills, who have really not been the same since they went to London in Week 5, and the Chargers, who obviously have the really historically bad pass defense that looked good against the Jets' bad offensive line last week. So, well, those 3 teams, who are you the most worried about?
Well, I'm a little worried about San Francisco because I think a lot of emphasis has been on Brock Purdy, okay? But I've seen their defense give up 400-plus yards 2 games in a row, okay? Both Kirk Cousins and Joe Burrow threw the ball all over them, okay? I think John Lynch was concerned, which is why he went out and got Chase Young. And now Chase Young and Nick Bosa are basically back together again, and hopefully they can get a pass rush going. You looked at the 49ers those first 5 weeks, and you're like, wow, they seemed like they were a real notch above. And again, Purdy's had some turnover issues, but that defense is concerning. And now, they face the Jaguars this week. Fortunately for them, they were off last week, and everybody in their division lost. So technically, they're back in first place for right now. Even though them and Seattle haven't played each other yet. The Chargers are on this weird path. They were 0-2, then they're 2-2, and they were 2-4, and now they're 4-4. So they got like kind of a Noah's Ark thing going. Lose 2, win 2, lose 2, win 2. And I'm throwing that out there, Mike, just for fun. People out there can go look this up. If memory serves me correct, the Seattle Seahawks in 1986 finished 8-8 and did that the entire year. Alternated 2 wins and 2 losses for the entire 16-game schedule.
Yeah, that's pretty insane. You think about that.
Kind of odd. I can't explain it, and so on. I think a lot of people are very concerned about the Buffalo Bills because they look like kind of a wayward ship right now. Josh Allen is continuing to turn over the football. They've got injuries on defense. They can still rush the passer, but their run defense has been shaky. It's middle of the road. That loss to Jacksonville in London, they gave up well over 400 yards of total offense. And, I know there's such an emphasis on offensive football in this league, but you better be playing some sort of defense or find a way to take away the football if you're going to pull this off and win the whole thing, And there's still something to be said in this league about playing defense. But, the Niners are a team, I think, that can regroup. I'm not sure about the Chargers because, they're coming off a year when they finally made the playoffs, and yet they squandered a 27-0 lead in the playoffs. That looked like it affected them. We've seen them blow leads early on in this year as well. And Buffalo, they're a little bit of a mystery, but fortunately for them, no one in the AFC East seems willing to, let them off the hook. I mean, they've won the last 3 division titles. Mike, we had a really odd week this week. Did you know that every team in the AFC East lost? Okay? Every team in the AFC North won. Denver was off, but the other 3 teams in the AFC West all won, and every team in the NFC West all lost.
Yeah,
you know what that means? I have no idea.
Yeah, it's one of those weeks. It's like nobody gained any ground.
No. And listen, we really even haven't gotten to the meat of the schedule yet because, especially the last couple of weeks, we've seen a lot of interconference games, okay, in which the AFC has built up a pretty good lead, which means later in the year we're going to see the divisional matchups. Like, I'll give you a perfect example. I'm looking at the Lions, and listen, they've had their lunch handed to them a couple of times, especially by Baltimore, okay? Minnesota was 0-3 and has kind of caught themselves. They're becoming a great story. The Vikings and the Lions don't play each other until week 16 and week 18?
Yeah, I did. I was aware of that. That's like a very late decision, for both of those teams.
Right. So, I mean, those are it could come down to, listen, we know the last week of the schedule every week is all divisional games. But, we haven't seen, the Colts have already played, I think, 4 divisional games. So have the Patriots. Okay, but there were other teams that have barely skimmed this. I mean, the Saints are 5-4. Okay, and they have played 5 of their 9 games versus the AFC. Okay, so there's a lot to go here and so on. I know people get a little caught up in early playoff seeding and who's in first and who's got the top seed, but listen, we saw it last year. Is there any better example than Jacksonville sitting 4-8 and running the table and winning the division the same year that the Titans were 7-3 and lost the rest of their game?
Yeah, we haven't seen that in a while.
Yeah.
All right, let's go now to, I think, the NFC. Obviously, we talk about, we feel like the AFC is superior conference in terms of depth of quality teams here. Like, how many legitimately good teams do you see in the NFC as opposed to, like, teams you were just kind of, like, mediocre and taking advantage of the situation that they're in by being in the weaker conference? Well,
I think Philadelphia speaks for itself. Okay, I mean, let's be fair and so on. Especially, they did play a couple games last year. They were 14-3, and Jalen Hurts did miss a couple of games. Okay, but they were in the Super Bowl. They have the best record in the league. I thought, even though Dallas self-destructed down near the goal line a couple of times last week at Philadelphia, there's a lot to be said for them. Again, Detroit, their defense has betrayed them a couple times this year, but they've also been pretty impressive as well. Minnesota, to me, is very intriguing because what they've been able to pull off and what Josh Dobbs did last week is absolutely sensational. I'm a little concerned about Seattle. Again, the Seahawks and the 49ers haven't played each other yet. So I would say there's maybe, it sounds like a weird thing to say, 4.5 good teams in the NFC that are worrisome. Okay, because I think the jury's still out. I think the jury's still out right now on Seattle. I mean, Geno Smith has turned over the ball twice, 4 games in a row. And their defense is a good pass rushing team, but not necessarily a stout defense. The 49ers, by the way, you want to talk about a weird statistic? The 49ers scored 30 points exactly in each of their first 3 games. They have scored 17 points exactly in their last 3 games.
Definitely interesting statistic to watch here. And obviously, my last question here, because obviously you mentioned Jacksonville a few minutes ago as a team that we kind of wrote off a year ago, and then they sort of had that big surge second half to get themselves into the playoffs here. Like, can you tell me one team's in the playoff hunt right now? I feel like they really separate themselves here with a strong second half.
Ooh. Well, a playoff team. Yeah, I mean, we could have an AFC because of the way the interconference going, where you might have a couple of 10-win teams that might not make it. Okay, I mean, look at the AFC North right now. Every team is at least 2 games above 500. Okay, that's pretty impressive. And most of the teams in the conference are coming off a win. Do you know? You know who intrigues me, and they have a tough game this week. Don't get me wrong. The Texans really intrigue me. They've already won more games they did last year. I know that's not saying much because they only won 3. But what D'Amico Ryans has been able to do, and it's not so much the comeback win over Jacksonville. I'm sorry, over Tampa Bay. They went into Jacksonville and laid the wood on the Jaguars. Beat them by 20. So there's something there. I think if Cleveland can get its offense straightened out and cut back on the mistakes. I mean, my God, here's one for you, Mike. Last week they held the Cardinals to 58 total yards. In the first quarter, Deshaun Watson threw a 59-yard pass to Amari Cooper.
Yeah, I feel that speaks more of the Browns' defense. They're leading up to the Cardinals, or a combination of both. But that's impressive.
Well, I think it's a combination of both because the Browns said, listen, when the Browns lost at Pittsburgh earlier this year, they gave up a long touchdown pass to George Pickens. But their offense gave up a pick six to Alex Highsmith and a fumble return to T.J. Watt. So, they gave up 26 points and gave up 2 defensive touchdowns in the process. People have not, even though the Ravens got those 4 offensive touchdowns, the Browns aren't giving up a lot of ground. Myles Garrett having a monster year. That front 4, you got Jim Schwartz as your coordinator, who's a better coordinator than a head coach. Again, if they can get things straightened out. Now, if they get swept by the Ravens, which is certainly a possibility, okay, that drops them to 1-3 in the division, which is, as far as going places, that's a little tough. But I will remind people, how funny is this? Last year, the Browns finished last. Everybody else in the division was above 500. Cincinnati and Baltimore went to the playoffs. Did you know all 4 teams in the AFC North last year were 3-3 within the division?
I did not remember that, actually.
Yeah. Well, that's why I get minimum wage. So.
All right, well, Russell, thanks for all the time. Really appreciate it. Always a fun conversation. People want to follow you on social media, keep up some of your football coverage. How can they do that?
Bax Football Guru on Twitter. You can find Pro Football Guru on Instagram and Facebook. And I'm doing a lot more different things with some sites now, Fanside and NFL Spin Zone for press coverage. Doing some writing about the Dolphins on Fin Fanatic. Might have something else in the works that I can't release quite yet. But if you follow me on Twitter, Bax Football Guru, you're going to get everything whether you like it or not.
All right, sounds good, Russell. Thanks for all the time. Really appreciate it.
You got it.